The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace, as Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez adjusted his dress blue uniform one final time. He had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and survived countless dangerous missions, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Today he would stand guard alongside the Queen's Guard as part of a special military exchange program between the United States Marine Corps and the British Armed Forces. Rodriguez had volunteered for this assignment 6 months earlier, thinking it would be a peaceful break from combat duty. The 28-year-old Marine from Texas had grown up hearing stories about the legendary discipline of the British Royal Guard, their unwavering dedication to duty, and their famous ability to remain motionless for hours regardless of what happened around them. He respected their tradition and looked forward to learning from soldiers who had perfected the art of ceremonial guard duty over centuries. The exchange program was designed to strengthen bonds between allied forces and share military traditions. Only the most disciplined Marines were selected, and Rodriguez felt honored to represent his country in such a prestigious role. His commanding officer had briefed him extensively about British military protocol, the history of the Royal Guard, and the expectations placed upon him during his month-long assignment. As he walked through the palace gates for the first time in his ceremonial role, Rodriguez noticed the curious stares from tourists and locals alike. His marine dress blues stood out distinctly against the traditional red tunics and bearskin hats of the Queen's Guard. Some visitors pointed and whispered, clearly intrigued by this unusual sight of an American Marine standing among the British Guards. The palace guards had welcomed him politely, but maintained their characteristic reserve. During his first week of training, Rodriguez learned the intricate movements, timing, and procedures that governed every aspect of guard duty. He practiced the precise steps, the proper way to hold his rifle, and, most importantly, the mental discipline required to remain completely still and focused despite any distractions. Lance Corporal James Wellington, a 24-year-old member of the Grenadier Guards, had been assigned as Rodriguez's primary guide and partner. Wellington came from a long line of military men and had served in the Royal Guard for 3 years. He took pride in maintaining the highest standards of the regiment and initially viewed the American exchange with skepticism, wondering if a combat Marine could adapt to the refined discipline of ceremonial duty. The 2 soldiers spent hours together, with Wellington explaining the subtle nuances of palace protocol and Rodriguez sharing his experiences from active combat zones. Despite their different backgrounds and military cultures, they developed a mutual respect for each other's dedication to service. Wellington was impressed by Rodriguez's quick learning ability and genuine respect for British traditions, while Rodriguez admired Wellington's unwavering commitment to perfection in every detail. During his second week, Rodriguez began to understand the unique challenges of guard duty. Standing motionless for hours required a different kind of mental strength than combat operations. Tourists would try to make the guards laugh, children would wave and shout, and photographers would position themselves inches away from the guards' faces. Through it all, the guards remained like statues, their eyes fixed straight ahead, their expressions unchanged. Rodriguez found himself drawing on his Marine training in unexpected ways. The same mental discipline that had kept him focused during firefights now helped him ignore the constant stream of distractions around the palace. His fellow Marines back at base had joked that guard duty would be boring compared to combat. But Rodriguez was discovering that it required its own form of courage and strength. The palace staff began to notice the American Marines' dedication and professionalism. The tourists seemed fascinated by his presence, and many asked the tour guides about the significance of having an American soldier among the Queen's Guard. Word began to spread through London's military community about the successful integration of the Marine into one of Britain's most traditional military roles. As Rodriguez prepared for his 3rd week of duty, he felt confident in his abilities and proud of his representation of the United States Marine Corps. He had proven that he could adapt to any military environment and maintain the highest standards regardless of the circumstances. Little did he know that his greatest test was yet to come, and it would arise from the most unexpected source imaginable. The incident began on a crisp Tuesday morning in October, when an unexpected visitor arrived at the palace gates. Sir Reginald Worthington Smythe, a retired colonel from the Coldstream Guards and member of an old aristocratic family, had come to inspect what he called the integrity of Her Majesty's Guard. At 67 years old, Worthington Smythe represented the old guard of British military tradition and had little patience for what he perceived as modern compromises to time-honored customs. Worthington Smythe had learned about the American exchange program through military channels and was deeply disturbed by what he saw as a dilution of British military heritage. He believed that allowing a foreign soldier to stand guard at Buckingham Palace, regardless of their qualifications, violated centuries of tradition and undermined the sacred trust placed in the Queen's Guard. His influential family connections had given him access to the palace grounds for what he claimed was an official inspection. When Worthington Smythe arrived at the main entrance, Rodriguez and Wellington were positioned at their posts, standing perfectly still in their ceremonial positions. The retired colonel approached with purposeful strides, his walking stick tapping rhythmically against the stone pathway. He wore his old military medals and insignia, clearly intending to assert his authority and status within the British military hierarchy. The Palace Guard commander, Major Patricia Thornfield, was conducting routine inspections elsewhere on the grounds when Worthington Smythe began his confrontation. This timing would prove crucial, as it left the guards without immediate supervision or guidance on how to handle this unprecedented situation. The standing orders were clear about maintaining position and discipline, but nothing in their training had prepared them for this particular scenario. Worthington Smythe positioned himself directly in front of Rodriguez, close enough that the Marine could feel his breath on his face. "You, American," he declared loudly enough for nearby tourists to hear. "You have no business standing where generations of British soldiers have given their lives to protect. This is sacred ground, not some international publicity stunt designed to appease political correctness." Rodriguez remained motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead as his training demanded. Inside, however, his mind was racing. He had encountered hostile situations before, but always in combat zones where the rules of engagement were clear. Here in the heart of London, representing both his country and the Marine Corps, he faced a challenge that required a completely different kind of courage and restraint. Wellington, standing nearby, could hear every word of Worthington Smythe's verbal assault, but was equally bound by duty to remain silent and motionless. The young British soldier felt torn between his loyalty to military protocol and his growing respect for his American partner. He had witnessed Rodriguez's dedication firsthand and knew that the Marine had earned his place through merit and hard work. The confrontation attracted the attention of tourists, palace staff, and other guards throughout the courtyard. Cameras began clicking as visitors realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Social media posts started appearing within minutes, with hashtags like Marine vs Guard and Buckingham Palace Standoff beginning to trend across various platforms. Worthington Smythe continued his tirade, questioning Rodriguez's qualifications, his understanding of British military tradition, and his right to wear any uniform on palace grounds. He cited historical precedents, family connections to the royal family, and his own decades of military service as justification for his position. His voice grew louder and more aggressive with each passing minute. The situation became increasingly tense as other members of the Queen's Guard began to take notice. Some supported Worthington Smythe's traditional viewpoint, while others had come to respect Rodriguez during his time at the palace. The divide reflected a broader tension within the British military between preserving tradition and adapting to modern realities of international cooperation. Palace security personnel began to monitor the situation closely, unsure whether to intervene or allow the guards to handle the matter according to their training. The incident was unprecedented in palace history, and there were no established protocols for dealing with such a public confrontation during active guard duty. As tourists gathered in larger numbers and the media attention intensified, it became clear that this was no ordinary disagreement between military personnel. The standoff represented a clash between old and new military traditions, between isolationism and international cooperation, and between rigid adherence to protocol and adaptive leadership in challenging circumstances. Rodriguez continued to stand perfectly still, his discipline unwavering despite the increasing pressure and public scrutiny. His Marine training had taught him that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from fighting back, but from maintaining one's composure and dignity in the face of adversity. Little did anyone know that his response to this challenge would create a moment that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. The tension in the courtyard reached a breaking point when Worthington Smythe decided to escalate his confrontation beyond verbal assault. Frustrated by Rodriguez's unwavering discipline and complete lack of response to his provocations, the retired colonel began to question the Marine's courage and military competence. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that only Rodriguez could hear clearly. "You Americans think you can march into any country and claim equal status with your betters," Worthington Smythe hissed. "Your so-called Marine Corps is nothing compared to centuries of British military excellence. You stand there like a statue because you know you're inferior. You're afraid to move because you know you don't belong here." Rodriguez felt every muscle in his body tense as the insults continued. His natural instinct as a Marine was to defend himself and his corps, but his training as a guard demanded absolute stillness and silence. The internal battle between his warrior instincts and his disciplinary training created an almost unbearable tension that threatened to overwhelm his self-control. Wellington watched helplessly as his American colleague endured the increasingly personal attacks. The young British soldier had grown to admire Rodriguez's professionalism and dedication over the past 3 weeks. He knew that the Marine had served with distinction in combat zones and had earned his place through merit alone. Wellington's respect for military protocol warred, with his sense of justice and loyalty to a fellow soldier. The crowd of tourists continued to grow as word spread throughout the palace grounds about the confrontation. Visitors from around the world watched in fascination as this real-life drama unfolded before their eyes. Many began recording video on their phones, ensuring that whatever happened next would be preserved and shared globally within hours. Worthington Smythe, emboldened by Rodriguez's silence and the growing audience, decided to make his challenge more physical. He began walking in tight circles around the Marine, pointing his walking stick at various parts of Rodriguez's uniform and equipment. "This rifle," he declared loudly, "has been carried by British soldiers who died defending this realm. What right do you have to touch something so sacred?" The retired colonel then committed an act that crossed every line of military protocol and common decency. He deliberately knocked Rodriguez's ceremonial hat from his head with his walking stick, sending it tumbling across the cobblestone courtyard. The action created an audible gasp from the watching crowd and a moment of stunned silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Rodriguez felt his hat leave his head and heard it hit the ground behind him. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, retrieve his headgear, and confront the man who had deliberately humiliated him in front of hundreds of witnesses. His hands gripped his rifle more tightly as he fought to maintain his composure and training despite the overwhelming urge to respond. Wellington's jaw clenched as he witnessed this deliberate act of disrespect toward his American colleague. In British military tradition, deliberately knocking off a soldier's headgear during ceremonial duty was considered one of the most serious forms of insult and disrespect possible. The young guard felt his own discipline being tested as he watched this violation of military courtesy unfold. Palace security personnel immediately began moving closer to the scene, recognizing that the situation had escalated beyond acceptable limits. However, they were also bound by protocol that prevented them from interfering with active guard duty, unless directly ordered to do so by a superior officer. The complex hierarchy and tradition of the palace created a bureaucratic paralysis that allowed the confrontation to continue. Major Thornfield, alerted by radio about the developing situation, began making her way quickly across the palace grounds toward the main entrance. However, she was still several minutes away, and the confrontation was clearly reaching a critical moment that could not wait for official intervention. The decisions made in the next few minutes would determine the outcome of this unprecedented crisis. Worthington Smythe stood triumphantly over the fallen hat, clearly expecting Rodriguez to break protocol and retrieve it, or at least acknowledge the insult. When the Marine continued to stand motionless, staring straight ahead, the retired colonel interpreted this as either cowardice or ignorance of proper military courtesy. He prepared to deliver what he intended as the final blow to the Americans' credibility and dignity. The watching crowd sensed that something significant was about to happen. Conversation stopped, cameras focused more intently, and even the other guards throughout the courtyard turned their attention toward the unfolding drama. The next few moments would create a story that would be told and retold in military circles, palace corridors, and international media for years to come. What happened next would become the defining moment of the entire confrontation and create a legend that would be discussed in military academies around the world. Instead of continuing his verbal assault or escalating to further physical provocation, Worthington Smythe made a critical error in judgment. He assumed that Rodriguez's silence and stillness indicated weakness or fear, and he decided to test the Marine's resolve with an ultimatum that would backfire spectacularly. "I'll give you one chance to prove you have any backbone at all," Worthington Smythe announced loudly enough for the entire crowd to hear. "Step away from that post, pick up your hat, and walk away from this palace. Admit that you don't belong here and return to whatever base sent you. Do this now and I'll consider the matter closed. Refuse and I'll ensure that your military career ends in disgrace." The crowd fell completely silent as they realized they were witnessing a moment of genuine historical significance. Tourists stopped taking pictures, children stopped talking, and even the London traffic seemed to quiet as if the entire city was holding its breath. Everyone present understood instinctively that Rodriguez's response would determine not just his own fate, but would send a message about American-British military relations and the nature of honor itself. Rodriguez heard every word clearly, but his response was not what anyone expected. Instead of breaking protocol to defend himself or walking away in defeat, the Marine did something that demonstrated the true depth of his training and character. He continued to stand absolutely motionless, but something subtle changed in his bearing that was visible to everyone watching. Without moving his head or shifting his position in any way, Rodriguez somehow seemed to grow taller and more imposing. His back straightened imperceptibly, his jaw set more firmly, and his grip on his rifle became more confident. Those closest to him could see a look of absolute determination settle over his features, an expression that spoke of unwavering resolve and quiet strength. Wellington recognized this change immediately and felt a surge of pride in his American colleague. The young British soldier had seen this same look on the faces of veteran guards who had proven themselves under pressure. It was the expression of someone who had found their center, who knew exactly who they were and what they stood for, regardless of what others might say or do. The silence stretched on for nearly 2 full minutes, creating an almost unbearable tension throughout the courtyard. Worthington Smythe began to realize that his ultimatum had not achieved the desired effect. Instead of forcing Rodriguez to break or flee, he had somehow strengthened the Marine's resolve and turned the watching crowd's sympathy toward the American soldier. Major Thornfield arrived on the scene just as this silent battle of wills reached its peak. The experienced officer immediately assessed the situation and recognized that any intervention at this point would rob Rodriguez of the opportunity to prove himself and potentially damage morale among all the guards under her command. She made the critical decision to remain at a distance and allow the confrontation to reach its natural conclusion. Other members of the Queen's Guard began to position themselves in subtle ways that showed their support for Rodriguez, without breaking their own protocol. They couldn't speak or move dramatically, but their body language and positioning sent a clear message that they considered the Marine to be one of their own, and would not tolerate further abuse of their colleague. The tourists and media representatives present began to understand that they were witnessing something extraordinary. This was no longer just a confrontation between 2 soldiers. It had become a test of everything that military service represented. Honor, duty, courage, and loyalty were all being measured in this moment of absolute stillness and silence. Worthington Smythe found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. His challenge had been met not with defiance or surrender, but with something far more powerful: complete and absolute indifference to his authority and threats. Rodriguez's refusal to acknowledge the ultimatum or respond to the provocation demonstrated a level of confidence and self-assurance that made the retired colonel's bluster seem petty and meaningless. The standoff continued for several more minutes, with neither man willing to give ground. However, the dynamic had shifted completely. What had begun as Worthington Smythe's attempt to humiliate and defeat Rodriguez had transformed into a demonstration of the Marines' superior discipline and character. The retired colonel's position became more untenable with each passing second, while Rodriguez's stature grew in the eyes of everyone watching. The resolution of the standoff came from an unexpected source that no one could have predicted. As Worthington Smythe stood in frustrated silence, realizing that his intimidation tactics had completely failed, a small figure emerged from the crowd of tourists that had gathered to watch the confrontation. 8-year-old Emma Patterson, visiting London with her grandmother from Manchester, had been watching the entire incident with the clear-eyed perception that only children possess. Emma had noticed Rodriguez's hat lying on the cobblestones and instinctively understood that something was wrong with the situation. Without asking permission from her grandmother or considering the protocol involved, she simply walked over to the fallen headgear, picked it up carefully with both hands, and approached the motionless Marine. The crowd parted silently to let her through, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Standing directly in front of Rodriguez, Emma looked up at his face with complete innocence and respect. "Excuse me, sir," she said in her clear child's voice that carried across the silent courtyard. "I think you dropped your hat. My grandfather was a soldier too, and he always said that a soldier's hat is very important. Would you like me to help you put it back on?" The simple honesty and respect in the child's voice created a moment of profound emotion that touched everyone present. Here was someone who saw past the politics and protocol to recognize a basic human dignity that transcended nationality or military affiliation. Emma's actions stripped away all the artificial complexity of the situation and reduced it to its essential elements: respect, service, and common courtesy. Rodriguez felt tears well up in his eyes but maintained his disciplined posture and expression. However, for the first time since the confrontation began, he made a deliberate movement. Slowly and precisely, following proper military protocol, he executed a perfect ceremonial bow of his head toward the little girl, acknowledging her gesture with the grace and dignity befitting both a Marine and a gentleman. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause that echoed across the palace grounds. Tourists, palace staff, and even other guards who had been watching from their posts began clapping with genuine emotion and appreciation. The applause wasn't just for Rodriguez's discipline or Emma's kindness, but for the restoration of dignity and respect to a situation that had threatened to spiral out of control. Worthington Smythe found himself completely isolated and discredited by the turn of events. His attempts to humiliate Rodriguez had been overshadowed by the genuine respect and admiration shown by ordinary people who recognized true character when they saw it. The retired colonel realized that he had not only failed to achieve his goals, but had actually strengthened the American Marines' position and reputation. Major Thornfield chose this moment to step forward and take control of the situation. She approached Emma with a warm smile and knelt down to the child's level. "Thank you, young lady," she said clearly enough for everyone to hear. "You've shown more military courtesy today than some people with decades of experience. Would you like to help Sergeant Rodriguez with his hat?" Emma nodded eagerly and, with Major Thornfield's guidance, carefully placed the ceremonial headgear back on Rodriguez's head, adjusting it to the proper position and angle. The Marine remained perfectly still throughout the process, but his gratitude was evident in his eyes and the slight relaxation of tension in his shoulders. Wellington stepped forward from his own post, a movement that technically broke protocol, but was clearly supported by Major Thornfield's presence. The young British soldier looked directly at Worthington Smythe for the first time during the entire confrontation. "Sir," he said with respectful but firm authority, "Sergeant Rodriguez has served with honor and distinction alongside the Queen's Guard for 3 weeks. He has earned the respect of every soldier here through his dedication and professionalism." The crowd murmured its agreement with Wellington's statement, and several other guards throughout the courtyard moved slightly to show their support. It became clear that Rodriguez had not only won the respect of his British colleagues, but had also gained the admiration of the public who had witnessed his extraordinary display of discipline and character. Worthington Smythe, facing universal disapproval and the complete failure of his mission, made one final attempt to salvage his position. However, before he could speak, Major Thornfield addressed him directly with the full authority of her rank and position. Her words would bring the confrontation to its final conclusion and establish the official response to this unprecedented incident. The standoff that had begun as an attack on American-British military cooperation had transformed into a powerful demonstration of the values that truly unite professional soldiers regardless of their nationality. The lessons learned in those tense moments would influence military protocol and international relations for years to come. Major Thornfield's intervention marked the beginning of the end for Worthington Smythe's attempted humiliation of Rodriguez, but it also initiated a series of consequences that would extend far beyond the palace walls. The Major, a veteran of multiple deployments and 20 years of military service, had witnessed the entire confrontation and was prepared to address it with the full weight of her authority and experience. "Colonel Worthington Smythe," she said with the crisp precision that characterized British military communication, "your behavior today has been conduct unbecoming of any officer, retired or active. Sergeant Rodriguez is here as an honored guest of Her Majesty's Guard, participating in an exchange program that has been approved at the highest levels of both British and American military command. Your interference with active guard duty and deliberate harassment of a serving soldier is completely unacceptable." The retired colonel attempted to assert his family connections and former rank, but Major Thornfield cut him off with a gesture that brooked no argument. "Your service record, whatever it may have been, does not give you the right to disrupt palace security or insult Allied personnel. You will leave these grounds immediately, and I will be filing a formal complaint with the appropriate authorities regarding your conduct today." Worthington Smythe's face reddened with embarrassment and anger, but he found himself surrounded by disapproving faces and isolated from any support. The crowd of tourists, palace staff, and guards had all witnessed his behavior and clearly sided with Rodriguez in the official response. His attempt to invoke tradition and military honor had backfired completely, exposing him as a bully rather than a defender of military values. As palace security escorted Worthington Smythe from the grounds, Major Thornfield turned her attention to Rodriguez, who remained at perfect attention despite everything that had occurred. She approached him with the respect due to any soldier under her temporary command, and spoke quietly so that their conversation would not become a public spectacle. "Sergeant Rodriguez," she said formally, "your conduct today has brought honor to both the United States Marine Corps and Her Majesty's Guard. You have demonstrated the highest levels of military discipline and professionalism under extremely difficult circumstances. Your response to provocation has been exemplary and reflects the best traditions of both our services." Rodriguez continued to maintain his post, but Major Thornfield could see the emotion in his eyes and the slight relaxation of tension that indicated his relief at her support. She made a decision that would become part of palace protocol and military legend. "Sergeant," she continued, "you are hereby commended for exceptional service and will be recommended for recognition by both British and American military authorities." The crowd, which had remained largely silent during this exchange, burst into renewed applause when they realized that Rodriguez was being officially praised rather than disciplined. Emma Patterson, still standing nearby with her grandmother, clapped enthusiastically and called out, "Well done, soldier," in her clear child's voice, causing chuckles and smiles throughout the gathering. Wellington approached his American colleague and, with Major Thornfield's permission, performed the traditional British military salute of respect between equals. This gesture was immediately copied by other guards throughout the courtyard, who could see what was happening, creating a moment of international military solidarity that was captured by dozens of cameras and would soon be shared around the world. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation saw a flurry of activity as news of the incident spread through social media and traditional news outlets. Videos of Rodriguez's disciplined response to provocation, Emma Patterson's innocent gesture of respect, and the final salute from his British colleagues quickly went viral, generating millions of views and overwhelmingly positive comments from viewers around the globe. Military personnel from both countries and many others began sharing the story as an example of the professionalism and honor that define the best soldiers, regardless of their nationality or the uniforms they wear. The incident became a teaching moment in military academies and leadership courses, demonstrating how discipline and character can triumph over prejudice and hostility. Behind the scenes, high-ranking officials in both the British and American military establishments took note of the incident and its resolution. The exchange program that had brought Rodriguez to London was not only continued, but expanded, with additional opportunities created for military personnel from allied nations to serve alongside British forces in ceremonial and operational roles. Rodriguez completed his remaining week of duty at Buckingham Palace with newfound respect from his colleagues and recognition from his superiors. However, the most lasting impact of the confrontation would be the precedent it set for handling similar situations and the demonstration that military honor transcends national boundaries when soldiers are united by common values and mutual respect. The final chapter of this remarkable story unfolded in the weeks and months following the confrontation, as the ripple effects of Rodriguez's disciplined response continued to spread through military and civilian communities around the world. The incident had transcended its origins as a simple disagreement between military personnel to become a powerful symbol of professional excellence and international cooperation. Rodriguez completed his assignment at Buckingham Palace with distinction, earning formal commendations from both British and American military leadership. His final week of duty was marked by an unprecedented level of public interest and support, with tourists specifically requesting to see the American Marine and expressing their admiration for his conduct during the confrontation. Palace guards reported that morale and pride in their service reached new heights as they basked in the positive attention generated by the incident. The formal recognition of Rodriguez's service came in the form of a joint ceremony, attended by representatives from both militaries, including General Patricia Morrison from the U.S. Marine Corps and Brigadier James Whitmore from the British Army. The ceremony, held in the same courtyard where the confrontation had occurred, featured speeches praising the professionalism displayed by all involved and announcing the expansion of the exchange program to include additional allied nations. Emma Patterson, the 8-year-old girl whose simple act of kindness had helped diffuse the situation, was invited to attend the ceremony with her grandmother. She was formally thanked by both military commands for her demonstration of respect and courtesy, and her actions were cited as an example of how civilian support strengthens military morale and effectiveness. The image of Emma helping Rodriguez with his hat became one of the most shared photographs of the year. Wellington received recognition for his loyalty and support of his American colleague, demonstrating the bonds that can form between professional soldiers regardless of their national origins. The young British Guard was promoted ahead of schedule and selected for advanced leadership training, with his conduct during the incident cited as evidence of his potential for greater responsibility within the Queen's Guard. Major Thornfield's handling of the crisis earned her commendation from the highest levels of British military command and led to her promotion to Lieutenant Colonel within 6 months. Her decisive leadership and support for international military cooperation were noted as exactly the kind of adaptable thinking needed in modern military leadership. She became a frequent speaker at military conferences, using the incident as a case study in crisis management and cultural sensitivity. The broader impact of the story extended far beyond individual recognition and career advancement. Military academies in multiple countries began using video footage and written accounts of the incident as training materials for courses on discipline, leadership, and international relations. The confrontation became a standard example of how professional military personnel should respond to provocation and how leaders should support their subordinates in difficult situations. Worthington Smythe faced formal censure from veterans organizations and military heritage groups for his conduct during the incident. His family's military reputation, built over generations of honorable service, was significantly damaged by his actions. The retired colonel issued a formal apology several months later, acknowledging that his behavior had been inappropriate and expressing respect for Rodriguez's service and character. The exchange program that brought Rodriguez to London was not only continued but became a model for similar initiatives around the world. Military personnel from Canada, Australia, France, Germany, and other allied nations began participating in ceremonial duties at various locations, strengthening international bonds and sharing military traditions across cultural boundaries. Rodriguez returned to his home base in the United States as something of a celebrity within military circles, but he handled the attention with the same quiet professionalism that had characterized his response to the original confrontation. He continued his Marine Corps career with distinction, eventually being selected for officer training and going on to serve in various leadership positions where his example of disciplined service under pressure inspired countless other Marines. The story of the Standoff became part of both British and American military folklore, told and retold in barracks, mess halls, and training facilities around the world. It served as a reminder that true military honor is not about nationality or tradition alone, but about character, discipline, and the ability to maintain one's integrity under pressure. Years later, when military historians examined the incident, they noted that it represented a perfect example of how individual actions can influence international relations and military cooperation. Rodriguez's disciplined response to provocation had strengthened the alliance between two nations and demonstrated that the best military traditions transcend national boundaries when they are based on universal values of honor, duty, and mutual respect. The courtyard at Buckingham Palace where the confrontation occurred was eventually marked with a small plaque commemorating the exchange program and the values it represented. Tourists and military personnel continue to visit the location, drawn by the story of how one Marine's quiet courage created a moment that would be remembered and celebrated for generations to come.